Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jules van Binsbergen. I'm the director of the Laureate Institute here at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 4th annual Distinguished Lecture in African Studies. We are honored to have Madam Leymah Gbowee here as our distinguished speaker this year, and Professor Gbowee will introduce her shortly. The Laureate Institute is proud to co-sponsor this important event, and I'd like to thank our other co-sponsors, including the Wharton School, the School of Social Policy and Practice, and the Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies program. Most importantly, I'd like to extend our gratitude to the Center for Africana Studies for bringing us all together tonight and for their great partnership over the years. Some of you may not know, but the Laureate Institute is a Master's in International Studies joint degree program with the Wharton School MBA. We are now in our 41st year, and in the last few years we have been grateful to work closely with the Center for Africana Studies on important issues shaping Africa's future. One of our current joint initiatives, the African Narratives film series, showcases perspectives from across the continent, and just last month we had the pleasure of screening Pray the Devil Back to Hell, a film featuring none other than tonight's distinguished guest, Madam Gbowee. With that, it's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Provost John Jackson Jr. Provost Jackson is the Richard Perry University professor, holding positions in both the School of Arts and Sciences and the Annenberg School for Communication. He is a pioneering scholar in urban anthropology, visual culture, and critical race studies. Notably, he's the only professor in Penn's history to have served as dean of 2 schools, most recently at the Annenberg School and previously at the School of Social Policy and Practice. In 2006, Provost Jackson was appointed the first Penn Integrates Knowledge, or PIC, professor for his exceptional work integrating knowledge across disciplines. His influential work includes 4 major books, 10 films, which have been showcased at international film festivals. Please join me in welcoming Provost Jackson.
Good evening. I want to thank Jules for that wonderful introduction and for being our relatively new director of the Laureate Institute. So appreciate you taking that on. And I actually just want to join him in thanking all of our co-sponsors again. It really is important for us at Penn to work together on these important issues. So I appreciate all of our co-sponsors for the work they're doing, making this event happen. So on Penn's behalf, as provost, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. The university is so incredibly honored to have our distinguished Nobel laureate guest, Madam Leymah Gbowee. Professor Gbowee, as you've heard, we'll introduce her later, so I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to let someone else do that. We're going to draw this out as long as we can, build up excitement. But I will say a couple of really brief words before I sit down. As you all know, several recent trends in Africa, including a reduction in extreme child poverty and healthy economic growth across the continent overall, are genuine causes, I would argue, for real celebration, for excitement. And Africa, demographically speaking, is often discussed as a young place. If the current trends continue, by 2050, almost half of all the people under 18 on the planet will have been born or raised in Africa. And yet many challenges we know remain. The topic of Madam Gbowee's lecture, Peace and Security in Africa, could not be more timely. While ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine tend to dominate the news cycle, Africa continues to suffer disproportionately from violence and unrest. At least 20 African nations are currently experiencing varying degrees of armed conflict, insurgencies, and severe political unrest. This grim statistic includes long-standing crises in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, with nations like Mali, Somalia, and Sudan facing ongoing violence and humanitarian crises. Military coups also continue to impact the continent. In just the last 3 years, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad have all seen versions of political strife. State and non-state actors, both internal and external to the continent, as well as climate change-fueled displacement, disease, and food insecurity, are driving many of these crises. Even Kenya, East Africa's largest economy has seen violent protests over taxes and the cost of living. As a global university with many connections to the African continent, Penn is uniquely positioned to help engage on these and other critical issues via research, scholarship, biomedical technology, and institutional partnerships. In particular, as one example, the Holman Africa Research and Engagement Fund is supporting innovative research projects from across the university from many different disciplines that are especially focused on sub-Saharan Africa. Africana Studies, of course, is deeply engaged on all of these fronts, and we're so pleased that Madam Gbowee accepted their invitation to offer her very unique perspective on all of these issues. Her talk will be followed by a Q&A with one of our amazing colleagues in Africana Studies, and we genuinely look forward to your insights tonight. So I have 2 more events I told people, so I'm going to dip out inconspicuously, but I'm going to stay as long as I can. So thank you for being here. And again, thank you all. I think you all will be very pleased to be here and have this really important conversation unfurled in front of you. And so now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our colleague, Wale Adebamwe, who is now not only Professor of Africana Studies here at the university, but our Distinguished Director of the Center for Africana Studies. So,
thank you. The Provost, Associate Dean, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Center for Africana Studies, I am delighted to extend a warm welcome to all of you as we welcome the Liberian peace activist, women's rights advocate, and 2011 Nobel Peace Laureate, Madam Leymah Gbowee, as our 4th annual Distinguished Lecturer in African Studies. For the record, the first in the lecture series was delivered by another Nobel Laureate, Professor Wole Soyinka of Nigeria, the playwright, activist, and professor of literature. The second was by the President Masisi of Botswana, and the third by President Julius Bio of Sierra Leone. Our distinguished speaker for this year, Madam Gbowee, will discuss peace and security in Africa. As Provost Johnson mentioned, dozens of countries in Africa are beset with myriads of security challenges. This is an unfortunate reality that presents unimaginable challenges for governance and decent life for millions of people on the continent. The political, economic, and social upheavals mock civil life and make daily life precarious. It was in this very context that Madam Gbowee famously came to the world's attention through her activism and leadership, as captured in the documentary Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Her leadership and the extraordinary courage of Liberian women to end the brutal civil war demonstrated the agency of African women that had been long ignored by the world. Their efforts not only led to the end of the Second Civil War in Liberia, but also the election of the first female head of state in Africa, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Our distinguished speaker has the stamina of an irrepressible social activist, the passion and vision of a concerned citizen of the world, and the sense of humor of a keen observer of human frailties. Starting a peace movement with local women praying and singing in a fish market in Monrovia, she mobilized the women to engage in fasting and picketing and eventually sitting to oppose the war in defiance of the autocrat in power at that time, Charles Taylor. The protests included the threats of a curse and a sex strike by the women. Madam Gbowee later stated, and I quote her, "The sex strike lasted on and off for a few months. It had little or no practical effect, but it was extremely valuable in getting us media attention," unquote. As an activist who wants to create a massive social change in society, as any activist who wants to create massive social change in society will confess, getting attention is a critical first step. The struggle of the Liberian women still resonates as a defining moment in the 21st century Africa. Madam Gbowee and the women's peace movement prefigured the grassroots movements, diverse publics, and ordinary citizens demonstrating courage to confront war, corruption, and authoritarianism in their countries, from the Arab Spring of 2010 to Black Lives Matter or civil disobedience in Myanmar in 2021, the women's peace movement in Liberia set the stage for what was to come in the 21st century. At the Center for Africana Studies, we believe it is essential to engage with a leader and change agent from such a pivotal moment. Madam Gbowee's insight on peace and security in Africa will surely provide us with a greater understanding of the challenges and opportunities in this area. Madam Gbowee is the founder and current president of the Gbowee Peace Foundation Africa. She also serves as the executive director of the Gender, Law, and Transformative Peace Initiative at City University of New York School of Law. Previously, she was the executive director of the Women, Peace, and Security Program at Columbia University's Earth Institute and the co-founder and former executive director of the Women, Peace, and Security Network Africa. She was also a founding member and the Liberian coordinator of the Women in Peace Building Network. In addition to her many leadership roles, she is also a United Nations Sustainable Development Goals advocate and a member of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation. She serves on the World Refugee Council, the African Women Leaders Network for Reproductive Health and Family Planning, the International Honorary Committee on the Global Biospheres Institute, and the Aurora Prize Selection Committee, and the Hilton Humanitarian Prize jury. I will pause if you want to acknowledge that by... Madam Gbowee holds an MA in Conflict Transformation from Eastern Mennonite University in Virginia and has been awarded Honorary Doctor of Laws, LLD, and Doctor of Humane Letters degrees from several universities around the world. Following her remarks, Madam Gbowee will engage in conversation with my colleague, Professor Jasmine Johnson. Yes. We have two Johnsons in the department, so. Jasmine Johnson of the Department of Africana Studies. Professor Johnson's work explores the politics of Black movement, including dance, diasporic travel, and gentrification. Her interdisciplinary research and teaching sit at the intersection of Black feminism, diaspora theory, dance and performance theories, and ethnography. So she will join her on the stage after her lecture. So please join me in welcoming the 2011 Nobel laureate, Madam Leymah Gbowee.
Thank you, Professor Adebawe. Provost Jackson, it would interest you to note that if you ever needed anyone to track anyone down, whether for crime or for life-saving, let Professor Wallet that person. After sending several emails to every email address he thought was mine, he managed to use all of his influence on the African continent to get my private cell phone number. I get a call one day, and of course I answer every call, and he said, "This is Professor Adebawe from Penn University." I'm like, "Okay, we're trying to get you to come in." I said, "I'm going to send you the email address of the person responsible for booking appointments or making me come to places." And he said, "Okay." So today, as we were chatting, he said, I can't even remember who gave me your number. And then we're talking about bringing more women for this lecture series. And I said, "Oh, he text me." And he said, I said, "Do you have my number?" He said, "Yes, I should have it somewhere." And then he sent me a text message. So this is the agent you need if you needed to get anything done. Provost Jackson, Dean, faculty and staff, student body of the University of Pennsylvania, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And I always start with, this is another day the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. I stand here humbled and honored to have been invited to the distinguished lecture series in Africana Studies. Tonight, I walk alongside great men who came before me, namely Professor Wole Soyinka, President Wasisi, and President Julius Maada Bio. The general narrative or general global narrative of the African woman is one of cultural suppression. This narrative, however, does not mirror my reality. I usually tell people, whether from the Western world media or European media, when they say, what was your growing up experience? I say, if you came here looking for the stereotypical African girl, go and find another person to interview. I'm not that person. Growing up in a family of 5 daughters with no brothers, my sisters and I were taught to claim our space in this world. And before I go any further, I have one of my sisters here with her 2 daughters. They live in Pennsylvania. So T and the girls, they're staying at the pussy now. We were taught to claim our space in the world. We were encouraged by our grandmother to never back down from a fight, irrespective of the gender of the opponent. It was entertaining to watch when we were much younger. And then eventually, as we took on the boys, people would cheer us. But after several visits to the police station for disorderly conduct, it wasn't cute anymore. We were then encouraged to channel our energy and everything we had in us into something more transformative. At school, I chose politics and speaking up for whomever I felt was being oppressed. You just have to look oppressed, and I'll be there to speak. That journey continued till today. A journey I share with many African women on a path to creating a narrative different from what is perceived globally. Today, I know I'm going to speak on peace and security in Africa, but I will focus on building peace, sustaining peace, and solidifying democracy. And I will talk about other African women, but I'll focus primarily on my nation, Liberia. Our nation, Liberia, is one of the few countries on the continent with a highly complex history. Recently, I did a crazy thing. I enrolled in the Doctorate of Ministry program at Union Theological Seminary. Every day I have headache, and I tell my kids, if I go to the doctor and they tell me this headache is associated with school, I'm dropping out. And they say, Mama, you're not going to try it, you'll stay there. But as I did one of my research, I was trying to find the name that Liberia was called prior to the Portuguese landing and calling us Pepper Coast or Grain Coast. Sadly, I came up with nothing. Our history begins with the arrival of the free slaves in 1822. Liberia was described as an outpost for formerly enslaved people, later a colony, then a commonwealth, and eventually a nation. In all of Liberia's historical narrative, there was absolute silence on women, especially indigenous women. Women in Liberia were first allowed to vote 1946, almost 100 years after we gained independence. When you delve deeper into our politics and into the history of Liberia, you will find that many indigenous chiefs who shaped their community were women. Many of the male political leaders will seek these chiefs when they found it challenging to get some of their policies enacted. Chief Swakoko of Bon County is credited for granting the land in central Liberia, where today sits the Cottington University College. Unfortunately, up until 2005, no one recognized her effort. From 1979 up until 1984, our political history was one of being ruled by free slaves, commonly called Americo-Liberians. Their rule would begin to crack by the end of 1989. There was a coup in 1980. Then 1989, we went to a civil war And that ended in 1990 with a full-blown war. The role of women in Liberia, like many parts of Africa, have been very silent when it comes to political life. In Liberia, we grew up hearing the people's thing, especially for those of us who come from indigenous background. And the people's thing was referencing politics. Women have been socialized, especially those from, till this day, as old as I am, if there was ever a media story that says, Madam Gbowee is about to run for the presidency, my mom will call and say, what did they say? Don't go there in those people's thing. The Lord has blessed a peace builder, and you are not a politician. So this was the history of Liberian women. Were never allowed, were not. So when the war started, it was about men who made war, men should make peace. The first public display of protest by Liberian women was in mid-1990s when they stepped out with candles, all in white, asking for peace. By the mid-90s, there was a group that was started called the Minor River Women Peace Network. One of the things that we need to know about Liberia is that social status is a key part of the society that we have. So when the Minor River Women Peace Network started, it was a network of elite women. And it did a lot of shuttle diplomacy, going from one country to the other. In 2002, a group of us, as you all saw in Pray the Devil Back to Hell, came together and we were demanding immediate unconditional ceasefire, the deployment of an intervention force, peace talks between the warring parties. But before 2002, a vast part of West Africa was also embroiled in conflict. President Bio was here, and I'm sure he shared about Sierra Leone that was in the heat of civil war between the 1990s. Sierra Leone had her problem. Nigeria, who was the godfather of Africa, of West Africa, was not even spared. Guinea had their own portion. Cote d'Ivoire had their portion. There was no space for any West African. And in all of these conversations about peace building in West Africa, women were very silent. A lot of the women who went to political peace talks ended up kneeling down in front of warlords to say, please give us peace. So when we step into this space, we step into the space with the same mindset that in order for us to get peace, we needed to go and beg the men for peace. By the time we started, we decided we wanted to meet Charles Taylor. We wrote 5 letters to him. One through his wife, one through his office, one to his brother, one through his pastor. Just about anyone we felt would get us to where we needed to get to. When we met Taylor in 2003, it was to say you needed to go to the peace talks. And then he said, go and meet the other warlords. We went to Sierra Leone to meet those group of people. But within all of these movements, women in West Africa were still thinking that peace and peace building was a male domain. As we shuttled between Liberia and Ghana during the peace process, other people were still struggling to build peace in their nations. We went to Ghana and we pushed for peace. We pushed for the signing of a comprehensive peace agreement. During the peace talk, one of the things that Pray the Devil Back to Hell will never show you was that the generals who were at the peace talk had asked, the Nigerian generals, not the US generals, had asked that the women sit in the meetings of the generals to think through a new army. Because if peace and security was to be delivered, women need to show how they wanted their army to be. We got there that morning. The U.S. general said there would be no meeting if we didn't leave. That we were civilians, and the civilians had no place in a military discourse. The Nigerian generals threatened to leave if we did not stay. So after moments of conversations back and forth, we were asked to stay in the room. One of the questions that the Nigerian general, General Ishaya Williams, asked, he said, whose army are we developing? Is it not an army for the civilian population, or is it a military for just military purposes? We sat in there, we gave our own perspective of how we wanted the Liberian army to look. When the peace agreement was signed, we had a over 400-page document. And we kept saying to those who were signing that we needed a simplified version of this document. Everyone came back and said to us they couldn't do it. So with little understanding of politics, the same way we came into advocacy, we took that document back home. 80 of us women sat in one room, and bit by bit we read it through our own understanding. And at the end of the day, we said, by this time we set benchmarks, and then we mobilized our communities to say, this is where you need to focus your attention. This is how you need to focus your attention. I'm paying keen attention to some of the areas of the work that we did that you will not read anywhere or you will not see anywhere. In December of 2003, the UN decided they would do a symbolic disarmament of fighters. So this symbolic disarmament was supposed to have about 300 soldiers come, show up with their guns, and then they would say, bam, 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 you've been disarmed. However, the mobilization process for that disarmament took this turn. They brought in a general from the US who came from Kosovo and thought that you could transfer peace processes from one country to the other. So the language we heard prior to that time is, I'm from Texas, and I've been to Kosovo, and I'm going to deliver peace the way I know how to deliver peace. December 3rd, 2003, proved to him that when you're from Texas and you come from Kosovo, you can deliver peace in Africa the way you deliver it in Texas and Kosovo. It was a hellhole. They were flying helicopters to villages and dropping flyers. And the people were picking up papers and they could not read what was on the flyers. Because the flyers was basically saying 300 soldiers to be disarmed. Thousands of soldiers turned up that morning. We went to the cantonment center with young soldiers to disarm, 20-something of them. Got there, shooting started by 2 p.m. The boys we took to disarm became our protector. And at the end of the day, we went back as women to our general from Texas to say, we are the generals from Liberia. We want to teach you a thing or two. We sat with them and we drew up a plan on how disarmament was supposed to happen. In 2 months, everything went the way it was supposed to go. By 2005, it was time for elections. No one had prepared how civic and voters' education would look like. Remember, the history of Liberia is that women voted first time 1946. And so 2003 will present an opportunity for many women to vote. And so in 2003, we had to go from door to door, carrying babies on our back, in the markets, in the churches, saying to women, it's time for you to step out and vote. The result, Africa's first female president. Today, when you look back at the work that we've done in Liberia, we've been able to work in many other countries by the examples that we set. And I can tell you that whilst we have all of these issues in other parts of Africa, from Libya to South Sudan, to Sudan, Khartoum, to Niger, to Mali, and all of the places where you see war, the one thing that is different from the 90s is that women are no longer silent. Women are pushing in all of these communities to be a part of the peace and security processes. And one of the things that people often say is, how are you delivering peace? My answer is, peace is not just the absence of war. Peace is the presence of conditions that give dignity to all. So even though the guns have been silent in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in other places that have had war. We can't necessarily say we have peace. What we do say is that the guns are silent and we need to solidify peace. So over the last few years in Liberia, what we've done is we started a new campaign. It's called Sustain the Peace. And many peace scholars have written that Liberia has proven again that they have shown the best example for post-conflict peace building. Because women continue to be in the communities, especially when there are contentious elections, to say, this is the way it should go. One thing we need people to remember is that the guns have been silent in our country for 21 years. It means a whole generation, and Provost Jackson talked about the young generation, a whole generation of young people in Liberia are unable to say, this is how the war looks. And most times we recognize that these are the generation of young people that the politicians will hype up for violence during election season. So how are the women stepping in to stop this? We pray the devil back to hell. From community to community. Sometimes 100+ community across the country. And we do public screening in backyards, in churches, in schools. And a lot of the young people leave there and say, is this how people suffered? And we've been able to sustain 4 circles of elections in Liberia. In 2017, when President Sirleaf turned over to George Weah, it was the first time in 73 years for a peaceful transfer of power in the history of our nation. On that note, you clap for us. This year, August, we celebrated 21 years of the silencing of the guns. And all of this have been possible because the women remain engaged, continue to be engaged in the peace processes in Liberia. Have we just stopped with elections and no violence? Because I know the next question is, how are you looking at women's rights? Because there can be no democracy if every part of the society is not free. So Liberia, we've been able to advocate and lobby for the strongest rape law. I think we have one of the strongest rape law in all of Africa. It's non-bailable. And if you are guilty, it's life imprisonment. But once you are arrested, you go to prison and then we have a special court in Liberia for rape. We also have the inheritance law. And that law prior to 2005 was that we had a nation where elite would marry in a village and marry in a city. And then when they die, it's only the wife who is recognized by law and her children who claim the property. But the inheritance law now makes room for children who are born out of those kinds of wedlock. We also have a domestic violence law. It will interest you to know that when I was growing up, of all of the trouble we made in our community, men who battered their wives, the police would come and say, take it indoors. Because domestic violence was seen as disturbing public peace. So you could only get arrested if everyone in the community was saying that you were causing noise. But today we have a domestic violence law. Many years ago, a single woman could not own land in Liberia, especially customarily. Today, our Land Rights Act includes women as part of the community. So married or not, you can own land. In many societies, including this country, conversations about women's body is primarily seen as a male conversation. You see MSNBC, when they're talking about reproductive health and rights, you have all male panels. And when they're talking about abortion right in this country, you have men talking about it. And Provost, pardon me for saying, one of the things that I always say to people, until you've had your period, please don't talk about our issue. Did I say a bad thing? Will I get invited again? In Liberia, female genital mutilation is a huge problem, was a huge problem. When I started activism, no one would talk about FGM if you had not gone through the practice. Through years of advocacy, today FGM is no longer a hushed conversation. Students are talking about it. It's in the halls of parliament, it's on the radio station, and in many communities today, they've suspended FGM because traditional leaders are recognizing that women have rights, they have rights over their bodies, and they should be the ones making decisions. And all of these would not have happened had we been sitting in the back. Despite the gains that have been made, despite all of what we've done, we still haven't been able to have the 50% in parliament. We're still lagging behind when it comes to leadership and decision making. And this particular issue is not just a Liberian issue. It's all of Africa. It's all of maybe this country. When we talk about breaking the glass ceilings, we've broken the glass ceilings in many areas. Liberia is the typical example of female presidency. But in Liberia is also the typical example of women building peace, women sustaining peace, and women solidifying democracy. But we know it's not enough. We haven't gotten to where we need to get to. As we've done all of this work, what are some of the lessons that we've learned? And this lesson is lessons that we take to other countries on the continent. Local ownership. We recognize that local ownership is vital to democratization processes. International partners are called partners for a reason, to journey with local actors as they do their work. Several years ago, after the fall of Gaddafi, I went to Libya to do some work. And when I got there, first, I got into trouble because of my mouth. I went to Italy to brief the parliament on the state of wars in Africa. And of course, they were only interested in Libya because of the colonial relationship. And I said to them that if they could pump money into NATO bombing Libya, they should be able to pump money into trauma healing for the people of Libya. I had not gone there. I was just responding to questions and some of the briefings that I received. And so they said, okay, we'll give X million euros to several organizations to do this work, but you have to journey with the organization. So that's how I got in trouble to go to Libya. So we get to Libya, Dr. Abulash, who is a Palestinian doctor and an advocate, my partner in crime. We get to Libya and we see all of what had been done by NATO. If any of you have the opportunity to go to Libya, you cry. Because there are millions of dollars, and I'm speaking to this because of local ownership and partnership, that had been pumped into getting rid of Gaddafi, but no one pumped money into fixing that nation. So today, every house has a gun, and every community is a proxy warring faction. We get there, and there are all these conversations about different things, but you don't see the partners who use the guns and the bombs to get rid of Gaddafi. When we come to building peace, Liberian women have recognized that local ownership is key. The second lesson we learned is that partnership and networking is essential. All of the laws that we've been able to get passed in Liberia would not have been possible if we weren't networking with different organizations within the country. Our organization was an advocacy, loudmouth group of people. And then they had the female lawyers who were sitting in one room and drafting all of these laws. In order for these laws to get passed, they needed the numbers of us to come outside and protest, fill the halls of parliament, fight if it was necessary, scratch a few lawmakers if it was necessary in order to get these laws passed. But it would only happen because we're networking and we had the kind of partnership with each other. The third thing that we've learned, and most of Africa have seen it and are suffering from it, that peace agreements by themselves do not deliver peace. So you sign an agreement and everyone dance and celebrate and you think that you've delivered peace to a nation. That's not possible. That in order for peace to reign, the agreement is the guide. There must be consistent engagement and monitoring of the implementation plan in order for that process to unfold. So let's take a look at South Sudan, one of Africa's youngest republic. South Sudan have had several peace talks, peace agreement, transitional government. This year we're very excited. I've been working with the women of South Sudan for many years. So we're very excited last February when we went to South Sudan and we're told that this December would be elections. Earlier this month, we heard that the elections have been postponed to 2026. A recipe for war to start again, a recipe for disaster. And I can go on and on talking about many countries in Africa that have signed peace agreement where the people have celebrated, but they've never really followed through. Unfortunately for us, international organizations that are quote-unquote experts in delivering peace and security or peace to our countries, they come with one-size-fits-all model. And this, in my opinion, have caused a lot of problems for us. The fourth lesson that we've learned is that money is key to development, but must be paired with innovative ideas. There's no way that you can throw millions and billions of dollars into any community and expect that without ideas, people will get their basic human security needs met. One final piece, women are core to all nation-building processes. Their interest is always linked to our collective humanity. Prior to the pandemic, I was invited by the Kingdom of Saudi to go and speak about women's rights. They invited several other Nobel laureates and different people, and I went with one of my daughters. And she said to me, "Mama, I hope after your talk we are not going to prison." I said, "I don't know, but I came here to speak the truth." And so everyone was on a panel. And I got into the room and they put me on stage by myself. And I could see this little girl in the back of the room looking at me like, "Don't do anything crazy." But the first exercise that I had for all of the members of the royal family, especially the men, and that's what I'm going to do with the men in this room, is to cover one eye. Professor Wale, you are the first. Everyone, cover one eye. And try to see you have to be a good sport. Yeah. With that one eye cover, try to see the full picture of this room. Is it possible? Thank you. In most of our communities in Africa, most of our communities across the world, all of our communities are trying to see through the development program, through the peace program, through all of the different programs with their one eye cover. And with your one eye cover, you can never see the whole picture. And leaving women out of all of these agenda is acting in a way that your one eye is covered. And if you uncover your one eye, you're allowing yourself to see the full picture of peace, development, and justice. And I believe that for peace and security to come in every nation, for it to flourish in Africa, because women are doing their best. I don't answer that question anymore. So please, people, if you're asking questions, don't ask me what is the role of women in peace and security processes. Because women's role has been stated, understated, overstated, whichever way you want to put it, that there is no way that we can do peace and security in Africa without the intellect, the unique skills, and innovation of women. And we've proven, Liberian women have proven, Sierra Leonean women have proven, Nigerian women have proven, all across Africa, even in the midst of the deepest and darkest civil war, women are still proving that we can hold community together, we can deliver a form of peace for our people, and we are doing what we can do. So any society that must move forward must have women involved. So in Saudi Arabia, when I had them do this, of course, everyone was looking at me like, and I pointed at one of the royal sons and said, you two, cover your eye. And they all covered their eyes, but we talked about the importance, and I spoke about the importance of women in the development of their nation. And I wasn't very calm. I spoke my mind, and I told myself I won't get invited again, just like I don't think the provost will bring me back here again. But then the next year they invited me. And every year I've been invited to the Kingdom of Saudi to talk about different things. Some people advocate you should not be there. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But I keep going because I think my voice as an African woman is important to every discourse. And I think in this space, young women's voices are important to the discourse in their countries. And I think even here in the US, when everyone is so anxious about what is going to happen after November 5th, the voices of everyone is important, not just when you have elections. Because when good people, not just women, but good people fail to speak, we give evil the opportunity to rise. And in this case, for this country and for Liberia as a whole, I believe that this is the moment, the times are calling for us as women to stand up for peace and security, not just in Africa, but wherever we find ourselves. In Liberia, our national anthem says, "In union strong, success is sure." One of the verses of our anthem. We cannot fail. I believe that the union of boys and girls, men and women, is the sure way for Africa's success, but it's also the sure way for peace and security to be developed, delivered, not just in Africa, but also here in the great United States. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when we say a collective thank you for being here and for your clarity of vision and wisdom and time. We're so grateful, and I'm really honored to be speaking with you. I am not going to ask you what women should do in this. I'm not going to do that. I wasn't planning on it, and you've already been very clear around that. I do want to ask a question, though, and you so helpfully and beautifully brought us into the present day, and I know so many of us had the privilege of seeing the documentary. So I wonder if we might begin sort of in the space of documentary and move to the present day, as you've already beautifully brought us here. But thinking about that documentary and the kinds of, we clearly see the gifts of women. And I'm also wondering if you could speak about the kind of incentives of masculinity to be invested in maintaining a war, right? That, you know, there's so much deep and thoughtful analysis around the connection between war and jobs and power. And so I wonder if you might be willing to give us some more language around how you understand the relationship between masculinity and war.
Well, I think, and I'll go back, and I hope I'm answering your question. A few years back, my son moved back home, and he was finding it very difficult to function, especially within the social sphere with his peers and his age mate. And one of the things he said to me, and I think is linked, and I'm going to link it. Please don't crucify me after this example. But he said to me, did you all get to a place? Because my kids didn't grow up in war-torn Liberia. They were refugees in Ghana. And so a lot of their socialization was away from all of the pains of war, except when women came to our home during the war and we would be chatting. But he said, how is it that the socialization of young men in this country is that you are only cool based on the number of girls you've slept with? And I couldn't answer that question. Let me rewind, and I'll come back to it. When I worked with child soldiers, every time we go to do counseling, one day we're talking about sexual violence. And I asked one of the boys, did you rape anyone during the war? He said, no. And then I recognized that he didn't understand my question. So I said, did you force any woman to have sex during the war? He said, is that what you're talking about? I said, yeah. He said, isn't that why women were made? When this child had a gun, he was 13. So at 13, but prior to that, he believed that women had no other role but procreation. I'm in another country in Africa where there is no war, and a young girl says, today is International Women's Day, and you all should celebrate us. And the young boy says, shut up. Women are only good for having babies. So in that moment, in my mind, if you took that boy out of a nation that had never had war and transported him into the nation that has had war and put a gun in his hands, his reaction with rape would be the same. I cannot say where it came from when you are linking all of this to the violence that we've seen. But what I can say is that the moments, the times, and I hate to get stuck in the pains, the times are calling for us to redefine our relationships. And I spend a lot of my time talking with young men, really helping them to understand the gender imbalance that our society is currently going through. I don't know if I answer your question.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I know we all have in the room, I'm sure, a lot of curiosity, so I'm going to try to cover quite a bit of ground and leave space for others to share. I was hoping we might be able to talk a bit about internationalism and diaspora, which you do in the documentary and did here as well. The women's peace movement of Liberia is obviously rooted in the specificity of Liberia. And there are also throughout the documentary so many different moments where we see the importance of internationalism, solidarity across country, and the importance of diasporic relationships. So I'm wondering if you might be willing to share a bit about how that massive win might have been in relationship with having networks, collaborations, and respect for women across nation.
Well, I think there was no way that we would have succeeded first. So one of the examples of our work that we take from is from the Aba Women's Riot in Nigeria. That is the first example of women publicly protesting. So some of the things that we did, it came from our knowledge of the Aba Women's Riot. But as we protested, it was very important for us that we had our sub-region, the women in the sub-region, really pushing for us. When we got to Ghana, we had women from northern Ghana, where they had conflict at the time. They came in droves to sit with us to protest. And the reason they gave was that if things got worse, they expected that we would do the same. So the relationship across countries on the continent was very important. But one of the things that was also very, very important for us was women. We really didn't get a lot of diaspora support in those years. And I must say it, whether it was from the Liberian diaspora or another diaspora, we didn't get a lot of support from them. But over the years, as the success of our movement began to show, a lot of the women in the different diaspora started, what I would say, picking up from where we left off to use it as the tool for them to start something. So in Cameroon, in different countries, you have women saying it's the Liberian women's protest that we saw. I talked about Israel and Palestine when we were having our conversation in there. In 2014, I got a call from a group of Israeli and Palestinian women to say that we need your wise counsel. So let me backtrack. 2008, when the documentary came out, we went to Israel. We screened at the Knesset. We screened in different communities. And when the Israeli women came out of the screening, they said, this is a beautiful documentary, but this is not our reality. When we went to Jerusalem, to the West Bank, and we screened with Palestinian women, the room was divided. The young women were very angry that how can women in Africa use their agency to bring peace to their country, and you Palestinian women are not doing the same thing. So we left with those two, I left with those two mindsets. From 2008 to 2014, then I get a call from Israeli women and Palestinian women, because in 2013, they had those 3 months war. And so 2014, they were celebrating the anniversary of the 3 months war, and both groups had come together to say they wanted to start a mass movement of women from both sides. So they called me and said, we've screened Pray the Devil Back to Hell together, collectively as individuals, and we need you to come. And so I couldn't come because my father was sick, so I sent a video. 2015, I encouraged them, but I couldn't go. 2016, I made the trip to Israel. And the women came from Palestine, Gaza, West Bank. Tens of thousands of women came together. Some of them who were allowed into Israel spent the night at Netanyahu's house protesting. It was a beautiful, so for years they've been trying to build a relationship, because both sides has always said there is no other way but war. And the one phrase the women were using is that the only way we have, there is another way, and the other way is the women and by collective peace building. So that is how the film has been used, not just in Israel, Palestine, but different parts of the world. I go to places and people are like, we are doing what we're doing because we've seen the screening of Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing also how that film is circulated and inspired folks' collective action across the world. And you brought us to a more contemporary moment. And I have a question that's about the now and forgiveness. At the end of the film, it kind of invites us to consider, I think with great humanity, about how to think about the perpetrators and ex-child soldiers. And it said, we cannot hold it against them, which I was extremely moved by. I wonder if you could share more about the role of empathy and forgiveness in the work of rebuilding democracy. And connected to this is your thoughts on the recently signed executive order to establish the country's first war crimes court.
War and economic crimes.
War and economic crimes. Thank you for the edit, which is more than 20 years after the end of the 2 civil wars. So I'm wondering your thoughts on this.
Well, any nation that is stuck in unforgiveness and bitterness is a nation that will never really heal from the wounds of war. We've seen it in many countries across the world. I've seen it. I mean, even today, as we talk about Ukraine, all of us can only pray because I was in Lviv, in Poland, when the war started. And when you sit and they're rightfully angry, my prayer is that when all of the dust settles, they will find a place in their hearts to say, this is a moment. And that is where we were. I, for one, was very angry. And the child soldiers were the ones I hated the most. But over time, it became very apparent that Liberia is a small country, 5 million people. We cannot continue to hold on to the pains of war. We will never really move on. So, and then when you do your analysis, a child of 8 who was given an AK-47, what understanding did he have in terms of killing whoever he killed? These young children didn't, so it became really mandatory for us to let go. When you talk to communities, and across many communities in Liberia, people are saying, we don't want anyone to be punished. We want acknowledgement. Let those who came and committed all of these crimes come back to us, acknowledge that they did the crimes, and apologize. So, for years, we've been advocating for the War and Economics Crime Courts. And the reason why we added the economic portion to this is because we've seen how corruption has also contributed to the devastation of people's lives as well as the war. People taking away money from budgets that are supposed to be for hospitals and for maternal health are responsible for the deaths of all of these many people. So today, our advocacy is that even if it is for 100 years, we will continue to pursue justice, but in a way that it is a local ownership. So what we are doing now is saying to the women, let's take this law, this executive order, let's break it down like we did with the peace agreement and see what is in it and how we're going to use this as a means of mobilizing communities. So I've been having meetings with different groups from the US government to international partners to people at the ICC about this law. And one of the things that I do not want is for, at the end of the day, the implementation to be based on how international partners want it to be. So our take now is let the implementation be based on how people in Liberia see the implementation of this particular thing. What do you want? Do you want prosecution? Do you want people to go to jail? But we are also cognizant of the fact that a valiant in one county is a hero in that same county. So, for example, I'll give a typical example of Prince Johnson, who is a senator now, but was one of the warlords. Prince Johnson, in Nimba County, where he comes from, is a kingmaker. He is celebrated by his people. Today, he owns one of the best high schools and one of the best universities in his area. A lot of people he supports with his resources as senator. He is now doing his, second or third term as a senator. He gets voted into office. But when you're talking about war crimes, he's number one. So when it comes to prosecution, we have to tread carefully and listen to what people say. I gave another example. There is one warlord from Grand Jide who is called Yaya Nimlin. And he just got elected by his people as senator. So the point that I make with this is that whilst empathy is key to everything we do, local voices, local expectation, and local strategy is very important for this war economic crimes court that people are talking about. When you go into communities, women will say to you, if letting go is going to keep us peaceful, then we let go. I'll give you an example of the complexity of peace building in Liberia, something that we've been navigating. One of the women came to me one day and said, how do I navigate this? My son was killed during the war. My daughter left and went into exile. She was on the refugee camp in Ghana. For years, I saw her. I didn't see her. And one day she writes, someone knows where to find me. They bring the letter. She's married. She has children. And her husband is a pastor. I reply and we start to communicate. And she sent me a picture of her family. I remember that face. The husband is the killer of my son. He went to exile and he got transformed. I know he's the killer of my son, but my daughter is happily married to him and they have 4 children. Should I tell her that he's the killer of her brother? Or should I just keep it until I die? This is the war and economics crime reality. Or let me just say the war crimes reality of the nation that we live in here.
I thank you for that. I know we all have a lot of questions in the room, and I'm going to be mindful, so I'll offer one while we all collect our thoughts. And that is, I had the great pleasure of sharing lunch with you today, and you shared so much about current initiatives. So while I'm hearing you talk about the complications and the importance of the local, here you are literally building institutions. So I wonder if you might be able to share a bit about what you've been not only dreaming but physically making there.
Well, I started a foundation after winning the prize, not because I didn't have work to do, but the Nobel is such a way up there concept. And people tend to, if you're not careful, become demigods after you've won the prize. I'm being very honest. So I wanted it to translate into mentorship for young people. So I started a foundation to send girls to school. And we started first with 7 students. And today I can proudly say we have 206 students on full scholarship. But then we have thousands more that walk through the door. So one of the things that we do is we have a specific program called Our Children's Fund. So every year I raise money for emergency grant. There's a new trend with universities across the world where they grant African students full 4-year scholarship, but your family have to buy your air ticket. Have you all seen that before? Is that a practice at Penn? If yes, you all need to stop. So many of these young people who get into these programs have no money to pay their airfare. So our children's fund is one of those things that one person would just come. As recently as 3 weeks ago, a young lady had a full scholarship, master's, straight through PhD to go to China, and all she needed was $1,500 to buy a ticket. And she couldn't afford it. She had up to 2 months, she could only raise $400. So we bought her ticket and helped her go. We've done it for students coming to the U.S., Germany, just to get. So our children's fund is, so we have thousands of young people who have gone through that. But our scholarship, 206 students, is 360 degrees. We pay fees, we buy clothes, where housing is needed, we do all of those things. And one of the things I said to you today is that when you get me started, it's almost like I'm having children again with my students. Because every one of them, I know their stories. And the reason why I spend so much time getting to know them is because I learned something during the pandemic, that you have to be interested and invested in what you do. Some people are interested, but they are not invested. And some people are invested, but they are not interested. But when it comes to those 206 young people, I'm both interested and I'm invested. So sometimes we fight, we get up, we fall. And so as part of that work, I'm building a space, a sustainable space. There were 5 Catholic nuns that were killed in Liberia during the war. And those 5 Catholic nuns were killed in Monrovia, but the plan to kill them was in central Liberia. I tell people God has a sense of humor. The land that we bought for that space that will honor the name and legacy of those 5 Catholic nuns is directly opposite the space where the plan was made for them to kill. So President Taylor has a farm, and so the farm is across the street, and the sister's place, we got 12 acres of land across from his farm. So we're building that space to honor the legacy of 5 Catholic sisters who came, empowered young women, had different programs in Liberia, but were brutally killed as a result of the Civil War. I do have some boys in my program, though, but it's a sprinkle. You know how when you bake the beautiful cake, you use colorful sprinkles on it? That's how I have boys in my program, and I don't apologize for that. I'm surely not coming here again.
We all hope you surely
There will be a newspaper article, the sexist Nobel laureate.
I'm looking at Kelly, and maybe we have some time for a few questions. Yeah? Anything on anyone's mind?
Let me take your mic.
Please.
Thank you so much for this amazing talk. And I'm from Colombia. My country has been in conflict, in internal conflict, for more than 60 years. Part of this conflict is because of narco traffic. And women, black women and indigenous women in the territories suffer more that violence, you know, the consequences of the war. However, when we try to take control of the political scenarios where we can affect or impact our communities, there is another situation that prevent us to affect or to impact on our communities, and it's the racism. 2 years ago, for instance, we had the first black woman vice president in the country, and she's doing a great job. However, the attacks that she is receiving is not because of her work, but because of the color of her skin. So in the spaces, in the different places where women have positions, most of them are not black women, and they don't understand what the black women and indigenous women are suffering in the territories. So my question for you is, because you were talking about networking and about all this kind of support that we can create together, but what happens when, in addition to the difficulties that we have as women to participate in the different scenarios, when there is a conflict or a situation like racism that it's making this fight worse, more complicated, what can we do, or what do you suggest, what do you advise for us?
I personally know your vice president, and she says that when she started her activism, she drew her strength also from the work that we did in Liberia. But I think one of the things that we do, especially in situations of racism or divisions, deep divisions, and I come back, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the Israeli and Palestinian women, but there's always this power structure where one group think until they are rattled, then there is a moment of let me recalibrate and let me start seeing the other as my equal. And this is not what we wish for. It's what you just explained is also typical in Anglophone and Francophone Cameroon, where I've worked. A lot of the women in Francophone Cameroon are not interested in what is happening in the Anglophone side with the Ambazonia and all of the wars that is going on. But let me take it from there, Liberia. When the war started, it was in the north. Those of us who live in the city didn't see it as our thing. When the country began to close in on us, then we wanted to talk to the other side. But I think there's always a moment where the vice president is in a perfect position where she has a convening power to now say, let me talk to this side, let me talk to that side, and let me see, because in grassroots mobilization or in any kind of movement building, it never really happened automatically. People must share something. In Liberia, it was, we want peace now. So what is it that both women from all sides in Colombia want? If there is that one thing, is that one thing that you can all come together around? When we went to grad school at EMU, they always used to say, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that on campus, and you can't do the other, you can't do the other. One of the things that we used to mobilize around was Friday night parties and food at my apartment. Everyone wanted to taste a home-cooked meal. And so that one thing, when I cooked, whoever, Vietnamese, everyone came and we sat down, and as we share our meal, we had conversations about things that were impacting us as international students. So it's even on this campus, there are so many trending issues. But if you find one issue that all the students share, that one issue can bring them together. So what is it that you think both women in Colombia share? Is it the narco issue that is impacting everyone, or is it sexism, or is it domestic violence? But if you find that one theme, I think that one theme is a theme that you all can partner around. I hope I answer your question.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. And I was just wondering if you could speak to the African Union and your relationship with it, or thoughts on the organization, especially as it relates to this topic of peace and security in Africa and women in Africa.
2 days from now, I will be at the African Union headquarters in New York. My opinion, if I express it, they will rescind their invitation to me. I'm being very honest with you. I believe, on a more serious note, I think the African Union is, the founding of the Union was a perfect idea. But every international body that is formed around countries is as strong as the nation. I tell people the UN is as strong as its member state, and the same applies for the African Union. So the leaders in Africa today, who is that one leader with the convening power? There's not one. So President Obasanjo, who is no longer president of Nigeria, I would say is the one voice that the AU has that is shuttling here, there, and everywhere, trying to make sense of everything that is happening in the world. In the days of Mandela, South Africa was very strong. Kagame is strong, but outside of the East Africa region, he's not that strong. And I can say that emphatically. When you look at West Africa today, who do we have? Maybe Professor Wale would say President, what's his name, Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana. No. I'm being very, very honest. As an African on the continent, one of the things that West Africa has in her favor is the economic community of West African states. Regardless of how weak our leaders may be, the structure of ECOWAS is very strong. And because we have a history of no nonsense, so our leaders now can just fall in the old shoe, but because also Obasanjo is still there, that people can reference. Southern Africa, who is there? What's his name from South Africa is having his own issues. So it's very difficult. So the AU will only get strong if the member states are strong. Right. But the AU will continue to be in a weakened state because there are not many countries on the continent. Really and truly, just close your eyes and think. Is it Uganda? Is it Ethiopia? Who do we turn to on that continent? Everyone has their own issues that they're dealing with. Either they're too old or they're too busy with the problems that they have at home. No one wants to see the coup leaders, and I'm not for military takeover. But in the countries that have had coup, the people are very comfortable with their leaders. Guinea, they're happy. Burkina, they are happy. Niger, they are happy. Mali, they are happy. So the question we need to ask ourselves is those of us who are voting in Africa. What kind of leaders are we voting into office? In December, Ghana goes to the polls. It's either Mahama or Bawumia. And people are saying, everyone is pumped up for Mahama. I see a Mahama win, a Mahama come back, in Ghana. He's been there before. What difference is he bringing to the political landscape? He's a very good friend. But we have to ask these very critical questions. Today, Liberia, the president we have, he says he has the will to deal with all of these things, but age is not his friend. Tinubu, age is not his friend. I don't like to paint a picture of doom, but this is the reality of the continent that we find ourselves in. President Mada Bio is one of those people, who's trying. But if you go inside Sierra Leone and ask the people, it's not well with him and his people. So I'm just saying, to answer your question, that yes, the AU is there. The structure of the AU is there. It's supposed to do great things. But if the nations that make up the AU are all struggling, the AU by itself will struggle. I hope I answer your question. I'm not the prophetess of doom. I'm a realist.
We are all out of time for questions. Right now, we'll invite Dr. Adebanwe to come and round out the conversation.
Thank you very much. So on behalf of the Center for Africana Studies, I would like to present this gift to you. Thank you very much. One final announcement before we leave. Thank you to everyone on behalf of the center. The door that leads out of this building on Walnut Street is closed now, so you have to make your way through the is it back door? But, anyway, the other door. It's just so don't, if you came in through Walnut Street. So again, I thank you very much for coming, and we'll if you're interested to get on our mailing list, we have the best events in this university, as my dean will acknowledge. So please get on our mailing list so that you can get to know of our other events. Again, thank you very much for coming.